Welcome back. You're watching the Global Dialogue, and we're talking about the outlook for 2025 for the global economy with Borge Brende, the president of the World Economic Forum. What's the view now on where China finds itself, and especially in the context of a Trump administration in the US? What could it potentially mean for China's engagement with the world?
So there will be even more competition between US and China. But they're big. You know, China is 18% of the global economy, US is 27%. So that makes up a big chunk of what is produced globally, what is the global GDP. The competition, I think, is related to technologies. Both knows that the ones that is on top of the technology, Gen AI, will also come out as the most competitive nation. China is, though, facing more economic challenges short-term than the US. There you can talk about the 3 Ds. One is deflation, one is debt, and the third is demography, because they have a sinking workforce now for the first time. So China also needs to go through reforms like Europe is doing. And, of course, they also heard from Mr. Trump that they will be facing 10% tariffs on top of all the other tariffs. He also says that that can be negotiable if they can reach a political agreement. But it is also more nuanced than that, because also China has said that they can come up with retaliation. They are, for example, the producer of 90% or 90% of the rare earth comes from China. Many of the most modern batteries with the highest capacity is from China. So I think China is also preparing for a situation like that. So what we need to avoid is a further escalation that leads to a situation with trade wars and decoupling, because that is not in the interest of the global economy.
Do you believe that we're heading into an even more complex global trade scenario as we head into 2025, and that's likely to weigh down on growth rates?
The short answer is yes, but there are alternatives to such a track. Let's first just recognize that 70% of all trade still goes through the WTO, World Trade Organization system. But there is more nearshoring, and there's more friendshoring. You buy stuff from countries where you feel that are your allies.
Right.
Then, on top of this, there is also more of industry policies. So countries say, oh, we want that industry to be established in our country, so you kind of go in and subsidize, incentivize, for example, AI, by R&D, and etc. We are seeing that trade has come back. It was 0.7% growth in 23. This year we expect 3%. So trade growth is almost as high as the global GDP. But what is more interesting is that trade growth is changing so fast. So what is really growing is digital trade and services. Traditional goods are not growing so fast. So those countries that are doing well are those that are stronger in services and digital, including India, where India is really very strong in this area and has gained from this.
What's the view on India at this point in time? What's looking exciting? What's looking good to you?
So what is really exciting is that India is almost becoming the startup nation of the world. So there are 140,000 startups here, and that's the 3rd largest amount in the world. We also have a lot of unicorns, more than 100, and I think there's like a new unicorn every 20th day or something. Why I'm saying this? Because this is the core of what can in the future become the large companies of the world. You know, Google was started in the garage in Silicon Valley. Many of the companies that are most worth, have the highest market cap today, didn't exist 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I'm very optimistic about the entrepreneurial culture and the startup culture in India. I think we underestimated that kind of power, because we are seeing in some other countries there is less of that and more bigger companies inspired by industry policy. So this is a strength. Secondly, it is a strength for India that there is a lot of digital knowledge. The young population is also something that works for India. We do, though, see that the growth has slowed a bit. We saw the second quarter numbers this year. There's different explanations there. But overall, our economists also believe that growth will go up again a bit in India, provided that there will be reforms. And we still do expect that India will be the fastest growing of the large economies, both this year and next year. And on top of this, you also managed to get in India, you also managed to really start to manufacture goods. And this is something new, and that is a growing sector. And that's also because of the diversification of value chains. Like, who would have thought that Apple was going to build iPhones for $10 billion in India this year, when there was almost none that was produced, manufactured in India just 5 years ago.
Which are the sectors within manufacturing where you believe we are likely to see India play a greater role?
This make in India has a lot of things going for it. And we know that manufacturing in India is lower as part of GDP than in many other emerging economies. You have in India a young workforce, a workforce that also many speak English, and there are skills there. But to do manufacturing, you also have to have good infrastructure, including predictable electricity, competitive energy prices. I think India is benefiting from companies then diversifying their supply chains. There will be companies in the US and Europe saying we cannot manufacture this hair in Europe or in the US, but we can set up also plants in India, as we have done in Vietnam previously. So I think that's part of, that's an opportunity for India. I still think, though, that the biggest strength of India is the fact that where the demand is really increasing is on services and digital trade. And there, India has comparative advantage. But, for example, on pharmaceuticals, India is already strong. So that's a form of manufacturing, too. And I think that's a very strong area that is also growing.
Do you believe that there's likely to be more significant setbacks on things like development aid, on healthcare spending and healthcare aid, for instance?
So, first, a lot of these are domestic questions in many countries. So they have to also make a priority of education and health. When it comes to traditional ODA development assistance, we are also seeing that many countries that are developed in Europe, including the US, are indebted. So we haven't seen this much debt since 1945 globally. So if you have a big debt burden and you have to cut your budget, it is unfortunately the situation that many countries then also cut and reduce their ODA. That's why the ODA needs to be more catalytic than in the past, and you have to bring in the private sector too. Because if you can then have a combination of governmental sector bringing business in, I think you can do better. For example, on the energy side, there are 700 million people globally that don't have access even to basic electricity. I don't think that can be solved solely by development assistance. You need to have investments too. So we're not doing great when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. By 2030, we're going to eradicate all extreme poverty. We had 17 different goals, and we are around 20%, if you're optimistic, when it comes to be on track on those goals. So there's a delta of 80%, and this means that we're not meeting the targets on education, on water, on sanitation, on fighting poverty, on girls' rights to education. So, and we know on the climate change is still there, and we are not seeing the necessary policy decisions to meet the Paris Protocol. Quite the contrary. We are this year in the hottest year ever.
Are you disappointed with the outcomes of COP? Because the developing world, emerging economies are certainly disappointed with the Climate Finance Fund that's been put together.
Yeah. So in Copenhagen, one agreed on 100 billion a year. It took 10, 15 years to meet that target. I think the agreement now in Baku, Azerbaijan, was 300 billion support every year to developing nations. The problem for many of the developed countries was that there is also a lot of pressure at home.
Yes, the debt that you spoke of. Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of debt, and they say, oh, we should use more on pensions, we should use more on healthcare. And many of these countries, like Germany and France, are also faced with right-wing parties that don't want to spend anything on development assistance. So it's a tricky balance. So I would have liked to see more from Azerbaijan, but at least we got 300 billion. We could also have been in a situation where we only had the 100. But if we're going to get back on track and the planet is not going to end on fire, the cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of action. So we will need to accelerate the new technologies that can decarbonize the world. And we always look at the cost related to that. But the cost also not doing it is higher, and we can feel it.
What is Davos 2025 going to focus on? What do you believe will be the central theme?
So we've taken that a little bit further, and we're focusing no more on the intelligent age. So there are more than AI. There's also other technologies that will contribute, hopefully, to humankind. But what we really need to crack in Davos is how can we collaborate even in a polarized world? Because there is so much common interest, even if countries are contributing.
What role can the private sector play there?
They can push and they can nudge. Look at, for example, cybercrime. Every year, $2 trillion are lost because of cybercrime. I think both US and China should have in a common interest to fight this. If you look at AI, can increase productivity with 10%, more prosperity. But we also need to agree on some traffic rules, because it's not a good idea that the algorithms control humans. I still think
that the humans need to control the algorithms. Yeah, absolutely.
And we need an algorithm that maybe can control the algorithms to make this into something that is controllable. We also know, for example, on future pandemics, we haven't really agreed on the new rules and how to deal with that. So even in this very complex world, we hope that private sector and countries can come together and say, these are the ways we're going to let others know. These are the measures we're taking to reduce the risk of future pandemics. So we're trying to identify those areas where we still can make progress.
Well, look forward to seeing you in Davos, Borge. It's always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here on the Global Dialogue in India. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the snow.
Absolutely. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of the Global Dialogue. From all of us here on the team, for now, goodbye and many thanks for watching.